Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People's Story. My lakefront property has been in my family for nearly 30 years. When my parents decided to retire to Florida, they offered to sell it to me at a family price. I jumped at the opportunity. The lake has always been my sanctuary, a place where I could escape the pressures of my IT consulting job and simply exist without demands or deadlines. Last spring, I invested over $25,000 in building a beautiful new dock. The old one had served us well, but it was becoming weathered and unsafe. The new construction was a masterpiece of treated lumber and composite decking, extending about 40 feet into the lake with a covered sitting area at the end. I added solar-powered lights along the edges and installed comfortable seating. It became my favorite place in the world. My morning ritual was sacred. I'd wake up before sunrise, brew a pot of dark roast coffee, and walk down to the dock. I'd sit in my Adirondack chair, watching mist rise from the water as the sky turned from indigo to pink to blue. Sometimes I'd bring my fishing rod and catch my breakfast. Other evenings, I'd invite friends over for drinks as the sun set, painting the water with gold and crimson. This dock was my pride and joy, my investment in quality of life. Our lake community consists of about 20 properties surrounding a natural lake that spans roughly 800 acres. While the lake itself is public water, access is entirely through private properties. Each homeowner maintains their own shoreline and dock. We're governed by typical county regulations and a loose homeowners association that primarily handles road maintenance and garbage collection. Nothing fancy, just practical matters. Everything was perfect until about 8 months ago when a new couple moved into the property 2 doors down from mine. At first, I barely noticed them beyond the usual neighborly wave. The wife seemed particular about lawn care, always directing landscapers around their yard with animated gestures. Their property transformation was impressive, I'll give them that. They repainted, landscaped, and added a white picket fence that seemed a bit out of place for lakeside living, but to each their own. I first met her formally at our quarterly HOA meeting. She introduced herself as the former president of her previous neighborhood association and immediately proposed a dozen changes to our modest bylaws. Most longtime residents exchanged knowing glances, politely shelving her suggestions for further consideration. I remember thinking she seemed high-strung but harmless. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first incident happened on a peaceful Tuesday morning in early May. I was on my dock, drinking coffee and reading news on my tablet when I heard footsteps on the wooden planks. Looking up, I was surprised to see my new neighbor approaching with a clipboard and wearing what appeared to be some kind of homemade badge hanging from a lanyard. "Excuse me," she announced in a tone that suggested I was the intruder, "but I'm going to have to ask you to leave this area immediately." I nearly spilled my coffee. "Pardon me?" "This section of the lake has been designated as a protected quiet zone by the Lake Preservation Committee," she stated, gesturing vaguely at the water. "No recreational activities are permitted before 10 a.m. It disturbs the local wildlife." I looked around, confused. I was literally sitting silently drinking coffee. The only sounds were birds chirping and gentle waves lapping against the shore. "I'm sorry, but this is my dock," I explained calmly, "on my property. I'm just having my morning coffee." She sighed dramatically, as if dealing with a particularly slow child. "Everyone says that, but the lake ecosystem doesn't recognize property boundaries. As the environmental protection liaison, I'm responsible for enforcing the quiet zone regulations." Environmental protection liaison? I don't recall that position in our HOA structure. "It's a newer role," she replied, lifting her chin. "Created out of necessity. Now, I'll give you a warning this time, but I expect compliance going forward." Before leaving, she placed a poorly printed flyer on my chair. It read, "Lake Preservation Notice," in bold letters, followed by a list of arbitrary rules, including no dock use before 10 a.m. or after 7 p.m., no fishing within 100 feet of shoreline, and something about approved color schemes for waterfront structures. It was signed Lake Environmental Committee, with no names or contact information. I was too stunned to respond properly. After she left, I called our HOA president, a retired school teacher who'd lived on the lake for decades. "No, there's no environmental committee or quiet zone," he confirmed with a chuckle. "Sounds like she's appointed herself to a non-existent position. Just ignore her, she'll settle in eventually." But she didn't settle in. Instead, the situation escalated. Over the next few weeks, she appeared regularly, sometimes shouting from her property when she spotted me on the dock. She began taking photos and making notes on her clipboard. Once she brought her husband along, a tall, thin man who looked perpetually uncomfortable as she pointed at my dock and gesticulated wildly. I tried reasoning with her, explaining again that this was my private property. I even offered to show her the survey markers and property deed, but she dismissed me with a wave. "Your paperwork doesn't supersede environmental protection mandates," she declared. "Some of us take our responsibility to this ecosystem more seriously than others." The turning point came on a Saturday morning in June. I'd invited a few friends over for fishing and breakfast. We were loading tackle onto my boat when she marched onto my property, straight down to my dock. "This is absolutely unacceptable," she announced loudly. "Group activities are prohibited in the preservation zone, and you're clearly planning to overfish the protected waters." My friend Dave, who happens to be an environmental science teacher, looked at her badge and asked, "Which agency issued that credential?" She huffed. "The Lake Preservation Authority, obviously." "Which operates under what governmental jurisdiction?" he pressed. "That's confidential information," she snapped. "I don't have to explain myself to you." By now, neighbors from nearby properties had stepped outside, watching the scene unfold. She seemed to notice the audience and raised her voice further. "All of you are in violation. I've documented everything and there will be consequences." My patience finally ran out. "Please leave my property now. You're trespassing, and if you return, I'll call the sheriff." "How dare you?" she gasped. "I'm protecting this lake from people like you. You'll regret this." After she stormed off, my neighbors came over to express their bewilderment. Apparently, she'd been harassing several of them as well, claiming authority over everything from boat speed to the color of dock umbrellas. One elderly couple had actually repainted their dock chairs from red to beige after she left multiple violation notices on their property. That evening, I formulated my plan. If she wanted to play make-believe authority, I would respond with actual authority. First, I needed documentation. The next day, I installed 4 high-quality security cameras covering my dock, shoreline, and the property line shared with her. I placed clear but tasteful signs stating video surveillance in progress at key points. I created a detailed log of every incident to date, noting times, dates, what was said, and who witnessed it. Next, I visited the county records office and obtained certified copies of my property deed, plot map, and shoreline rights documentation. While there, I also researched local ordinances regarding harassment, trespassing, and waterfront regulations. I discovered something interesting. Our lake had specific setback requirements for permanent structures near the shoreline, which her newly installed gazebo appeared to violate. I considered sending a formal cease and desist letter, but decided on a more comprehensive approach. What she needed wasn't just a legal warning, but a reality check, preferably one witnessed by the community she was trying to impress. Our annual Lake Association summer picnic was scheduled for the following weekend. These gatherings typically included updates on community matters, which gave me an idea. I contacted our HOA president and requested a few minutes on the agenda. Given the growing number of complaints about our self-appointed lake protector, he readily agreed. I spent the week preparing a simple, fact-based presentation on private property rights versus public water access on our lake, complete with handouts showing the relevant county ordinances. I also printed satellite images of the lake with properly marked property lines, which I verified with the county assessor's office. The day before the picnic, I found a laminated "Dock closed by order of Lake Preservation Committee" sign attached to my dock. My security camera had captured her, placing it at 5:43 a.m. I left it there as evidence and continued with my preparations. The picnic was well attended, with nearly every lakefront homeowner present, including her and her husband. When the president introduced me for my presentation on understanding our lake rights and responsibilities, I noticed her shifting uncomfortably. "Thank you all for coming today," I began. "Recently, several of us have had questions about our rights and responsibilities as lakefront property owners. I've done some research I'd like to share." I proceeded to explain, with documentation displayed on easels, the exact legal boundaries of private property around the lake, including docks. I clarified which regulations were actual county ordinances versus HOA guidelines. I explained the difference between public water access rights and private property boundaries. At no point did I mention her by name or directly reference the incidents. In summary, I concluded, while we all share responsibility for maintaining the health and beauty of our lake, no individual property owner has authority over another's dock, shoreline, or private property. Any concerns about potential violations of actual ordinances should be directed to the County Environmental Office or our HOA board, not handled through confrontations or unauthorized notices. I then introduced a surprise guest, an environmental officer from the county conservation department who I'd invited to answer questions. The officer provided information about actual lake preservation efforts and clarified that there was no lake preservation committee recognized by any governmental authority. Throughout my presentation, I watched her face turn increasingly red. Her husband stared at the ground, seemingly wishing to disappear. When the quanda began, several neighbors asked pointed questions clearly inspired by her false claims. The officer patiently explained that no, there were no quiet zones on the lake, no restrictions on dock usage hours, and certainly no ban on red chairs. Someone asked about enforcement authority, and the officer explained that only designated county officials and law enforcement had actual authority to enforce ordinances. Anyone else claiming such authority would be misrepresenting themselves, he added. The HOA president then spoke up. To avoid future confusion, all official notices will come directly from the board on official letterhead with contact information. Please disregard any other notices you may receive regarding lake regulations. She left before the picnic ended, practically dragging her husband behind her. I felt a moment of sympathy for the man, who looked thoroughly mortified. The next day, I noticed her taking photos of my property from her yard. My cameras caught her placing something at the edge of my property line late that evening. It was another handmade notice claiming my dock lighting violated dark sky ordinances. I added it to my documentation file. Phase 2 of my plan involved a more direct approach. I hired a surveyor to officially mark my property boundaries with visible stakes. I installed modest but unmistakable private property signs along the line shared with her property. I also upgraded my dock lighting to ensure it was both beautiful and fully compliant with actual county regulations. Then I invited friends over for a perfectly legal by-the-book lakeside barbecue. We fished with proper licenses, played music at reasonable volumes and only during permitted hours, and enjoyed my dock to its fullest extent. When she appeared at the property line, gesturing angrily, I simply pointed to the survey stakes and property signs, then returned to my guests. The following week brought the escalation I'd anticipated. My security cameras captured her entering my property at 6:15 a.m., marching down to my dock and rearranging my furniture. She left another notice claiming she was configuring the dock area for proper environmental flow. This was the clear act of trespassing I needed. I took the footage and my documentation to the sheriff's office and filed a formal complaint. The deputy reviewed my evidence and agreed it warranted action. 2 days later, I was working from home when I noticed a sheriff's vehicle pull up to her house. Through my kitchen window, I watched as 2 deputies spoke with her for nearly 20 minutes. Her arms waved animatedly while they remained professionally composed. Eventually, they handed her some papers before departing. That evening, my doorbell rang. It was the same deputies following up with me. They confirmed they had issued her a formal warning for trespassing and explained they had clarified that her committee had no legal standing. They advised me to call immediately if she entered my property again. She seemed genuinely surprised that she doesn't have authority over the lake, one deputy remarked with barely concealed amusement. For nearly 2 weeks, I enjoyed peaceful mornings on my dock. The cameras captured her watching from her property, but she kept her distance. I began to think perhaps the matter was resolved. Then came the community email. Our HOA president forwarded a message she had sent to the entire board, claiming I was operating an illegal commercial fishing enterprise from my dock based on the number of guests I'd entertained. She demanded an emergency meeting to address my violations. The board's response was perfect. They replied to all, stating that they had verified my property usage was entirely within guidelines, that personal fishing with valid licenses was permitted regardless of frequency, and that the matter was considered closed. They concluded with a reminder that false accusations against neighbors could potentially constitute harassment. The final act in our lakeside drama occurred unexpectedly. While enjoying my morning coffee on the dock, I noticed unusual activity at her property. A realtor was placing a for sale sign at the edge of the yard. Within a month, moving trucks appeared. I watched from a distance as they loaded furniture. Her husband nodded politely in my direction as they made their final departure, but she kept her gaze averted. Later that week, I ran into our HOA president at the local hardware store. "Heard the news?" he asked. Apparently, they're moving to a more environmentally conscious community, according to her goodbye email. Something about our lake association not taking preservation seriously enough. I nodded thoughtfully. I hope they find what they're looking for. Between us, he lowered his voice. I called my buddy who works in real estate. Turns out they tried this same routine in their previous neighborhood. Something about appointing themselves as the Architectural Review Committee and fining neighbors for unapproved mailboxes didn't end well there either. That evening, I enjoyed a particularly spectacular sunset from my dock. The lake was peaceful, with just the sounds of water lapping against the wood and birds calling in the distance. I raised my glass in a silent toast to proper documentation, community solidarity, and the sweet satisfaction of standing your ground against entitlement. The new owners who moved in 3 months later turned out to be a delightful retired couple who asked permission before even setting foot near my property line. We now have regular Friday evening happy hours on my dock, watching the sunset together. Sometimes we even use red chairs just because we can. The next one is a pro-revenge story. This just happened. I just finished finals for university and got screwed over. It started in my computer science class a couple months before today. Projects 3 and 4 were to be group projects. We were assigned a teammate from the class. My teammate, we'll call him Sam, and I decided we'd meet up and work on the project. After discussing what we wanted to do, we found the easiest way would be to work remotely and text each other as we both have very busy schedules. Flash forward to a week before it's due, and Sam has done nothing. I started working on it and was waiting for him to collaborate. He did not. At this point, I said duck it and starting working on the project. I got 90% of it done in 3 days and left the other 10% to him. He kept saying how sorry he was and that he was busy. Okay, I get it. I'm busy too. You could have put more effort in, but our peer evals will reflect that. Well, he does the last 10%, but not correctly. So I go back in and finish it and submit it, thinking I won't have to deal with him again. Wrong. The next week, we had an exam. Exams in this class had an in-class portion and an online coding portion, each worth about 50% of the total exam grade. Online portions were released a few days before and were due before midnight exam day. Well, at 7 p.m. on exam day, I got a text from Sam asking to send an online portion. I ignored it, and he kept texting. It was like he felt entitled to getting my exam. I wasn't about to fail this test or give a leech blood, but this really pissed me off. Then we had Project 4 assigned. It was essentially an extension of Project 3, so we would have the same groups. This project was much harder and way more time-consuming. Knowing Sam's work ethic last time, I came up with a plan. I did minimal work on the project up until the week before it was due. Then I ramped it up, but not enough to complete the project. The day before it was due, I got a text from Sam saying, "I'm sorry, dude, I was super busy with my other project and didn't have time to work on it. Is there anything left to do?" Now, we used an online code editor that works similar to Google Docs in that you can see who is looking at the file and where their cursor is. I had seen his periodically throughout the entire last week. He was checking on how I was doing, but not actually helping, so when he asked, "Is there anything left to do?" my response was no. He apologized profusely. He just texted sorry, and I immediately emailed the professor explaining the situation, then proceeded to finish the project. This a-hole was going down. A couple hours later, I got an email back from my professor. Just as I thought, Sam had submitted the incomplete code, each partner submitted separately, as his own. My prof was very understanding and replied with this. The submission Sam put up was not fully featured or particularly well working, so he did not receive much in the way of points. I was unaware who did what, though, and as it seems to be your work, his grade will reflect that. His failures are his own. Justice served, Mother Ducker. I got another text from Sam today, asking me what I got on the project. Telling him that I got an A was the most satisfying thing ever. The next one is a malicious compliance story. As a military officer, it was required to apply to retire 12 months out from your retirement date. I was in what I would call a mid-level manager job. I had about 40 employees and we had a $500 million annual budget for our program. My team was really great with very professional and competent people and rarely any issues. We performed really well. They would come to me with their issues, and over time I saw patterns and we would fix them. For instance, one issue we solved saved the organization $64 million over a 4-year period. We had a lot of other smaller wins, a few million here and there, but that was a biggie. My boss, who was bucking for general, was a jerk. For lots of reasons, but just a sour and unhappy person. About 7 months from my retirement in the following spring, we decided to move my spouse and kids to my hometown to be able to start the new school year. We had a house and just needed to move and get set up. I asked for 3 weeks and the boss would only give me 2 weeks. That only gave us a week and a half to get my family settled after the 4-day drive with kids, animals, etc. Plus the furniture and everything to arrive just 2 days before I had to be on a plane back. So I was salty. Game on. I was prior enlisted and knew how to play the game by the book. It is important to note that I only missed about 10 days of work in 23 years due to illness. 2 things happened. No more multi-million-dollar savings ideas that made the boss look good came out of my office, and it was time for me to take care of stuff I neglected over the years. In regular meetings, when asked where the next savings was going to come from, it was always crickets. I knew I needed surgery for an injury I had some other medical issues I had been neglecting due to work and just life. I planned to take care of all that post-retirement, as it would give me time to recover and figure out what I would do for a living because we couldn't survive on just retirement. Since my boss wouldn't let me get my family settled, it was time to take care of all my medical issue. I made medical appointments to get checked out for all my issues. I had 2 procedures that had me out of work for a week each, but the cherry on top was I got surgery the day before Thanksgiving and the doctor had me on convalescent leave for 4 weeks. When you are on leave like that, you have to have a form signed by your boss and it indicates the address where you will be taking that time to recover. Of course, I used my hometown address so my wife could help me recover. Boss was pissed and tried to deny the leave. It went to our version of HR, and they said he had to allow it. That made him even more pissed. In the end, I got to spend the holidays with my family across the country and only had about 3 weeks left on the job before taking my terminal leave that he could not deny when I returned. I didn't want a ceremony or anything, I just rode off into the sunset. The next one is an entitled people story. Disclaimer. Yes, we know we should have stopped my sister's drinking and driving long ago, but she had us all mentally beaten down and walking on eggshells around her. She even made us feel powerless at times because her kids were emotional blackmail to us until her ex took them. It's not really an excuse, but I've heard all the comments about it before and admitted to being a coward about it. And no, I can't report her now because I don't even know where she currently lives, or if she even owns a vehicle. But for now, I'm NC with her at least, and she blames me for not choosing her over the rest of the family. Around 8 years ago, my sister got a DUI. Only a couple months prior to that, she asked me to give her my honest opinion about her driving, so I did. I told her she was a cocky driver because she kept drinking and driving and she wasn't getting new tires for her car. The ones on it had gone bald. My sister brushed me off and was like, "Whatever, I have the skills." Just a couple months later, she got wasted and tried to drive home. She drove like a maniac. One of her bald tires blew out. She lost control and rammed her car into a large bush tree. The kind of tree that grows like a large bush. Hitting it completely totaled the car. I was at home babysitting my sister's kids well after they fell asleep. Then I suddenly got a call after midnight. It was my sister crying. She kept saying she needed me to come help her, but kept refusing to say why. She wasn't even telling me where she was. She just kept saying to come help her. Then she started crying harder and saying steam was coming out of her car. Then she just got really incoherent, but was still refusing to tell me what happened. I told her it wasn't fair to me that she was trying to get my help without telling me what was going on. So she finally told me she crashed. Then she started panicking because police were arriving, and I heard her telling them the usual "no officer" lines. I got her rough location before the call ended and hopped in my car to go find her. When I got there, the police were already arresting her. They breathalyzed her, and I think she blew something like a 0.28. The cops couldn't believe she was still standing, let alone acting so lucid. My sister begged me to go get help from our parents because she didn't want her car impounded. I told her I'd drive back and get them as fast as the speed limits would allow. One of the cops looked at me and said, "Good man." I drove back and had to wake my parents up, and then explain to them what happened through their bedroom door. Well, my stepfather got dressed, and then we tried to get my sister's car out of there, only to find it was undrivable. The radiator was shot, 3 out of 4 tires were flat, and the body was sprung. So we had to spend 3 hours waiting for AAA to come tow it. 3 hours of misery of hazard lights flashing in our eyes with the constant click-click noises. That totaled car sat in the yard for a year before my sister finally junked it. She kept saying she wanted it repaired, but it was completely totaled. I at least got to rip the battery out of it to put in a 64 VW Beetle I used to have. My sister soon went to court, got her license suspended, had to abstain from alcohol till she finished her DUI classes, and I had to drive her around for months. I had to drive her to and from work, to her DUI classes, and to anything else she wanted or needed. And I did have to go off on her a few times over her complaints about my driving. She hates that I generally drive safe, because she wants to get everywhere extra fast. There were 2 incidents she actually debated the speed of a school zone with me. It was 20 miles per hour when active, and 40 miles per hour when inactive. I slowed down to 40, and then she started telling me to speed up and go 45, then claimed it was 45 through the school zone. We argued, and then I had to point to the 40 miles per hour sign to her, and then she pouted. This actually happened twice. Seriously, who debates the speed limit of a school zone? Once my sister got her license back, she claimed she'd never drink and drive again. That vow lasted about a year before she broke it, but she was carefully covert about it for a while, so we didn't notice till it became obvious, especially after the Christmas crash. In 2023 or so, our stepfather got a DUI for just moving his car across a casino parking lot, and my sister was all over mocking him, even though she got a DUI for completely totaling her car some years prior, and then she got pissy because all her theories about the situation were wrong. She even got a bit giddy talking about our stepfather's misery and said, "I bet he's blaming what happened on the police and everyone else." And I said, "No, he's completely owning up to it." She seemed to twitch, and then said, "Yeah, well, I bet he's really angry about it." And I said, "No, he's really quiet and remorseful." Then she said, "Well, I bet he's getting wasted right now." And I said that he'd hardly touched a drop of alcohol since the incident. Wrong on all three. My sister scrunched up her face and then said, "You know what? Don't talk to me," and slammed the door shut. I was ready to remind her of her own DUI situation if she brought it up again. She brought up our stepfather's DUI one more time days later. I reminded her of her own far worse DUI, and she bitterly shut right up. She hasn't spoken of it since, at least that I know of. She was telling people all sorts of crap behind our backs. She probably twists the story to anyone she mentions it to now. Not that it matters anymore. We evicted her some time ago, and I've been trying to stay NC with her, but she still bothered me a few times. Anyway, thank you for watching.